Hello world, Nemesis Reaper here, also known as Eric. I'm sitting here in my car, and while it always seems a little bit unusual, I work my job right now, but because of the nature of my job, I have quite a bit of downtime, and I have plenty of time to actually ponder a couple of subjects, most in the philosophical and economic nature. And if you're wondering why economic nature, it's because, unfortunately, if you're working 60 hours a week, you're probably going to think about the actual economic benefactor of that. Or should I just say factor? Whichever the case may be. Doesn't really matter. What I'm talking about in this video, it's going to be about the term wage slavery. While most of us in the working class would agree, there is such a thing as wage slavery. It's not quite as profoundly complex as actual slavery, but actually in a way it is, because actual slavery is quite straightforward. You are owning another human being as property, private property. If you consider that under a capitalist system, they are nothing more but property, not actual human beings. Whereas if you take into the nuance of, in our modern capitalist system, you're not technically a quote-unquote slave. So what do I mean by that? Okay, let's go into the factors here. So if you are a wage slave, what is often being referred to? You're working for rather low pay in such a setting that there isn't really a degree for advancement, and losing the said job or not having this income at all is equivalent of putting somebody in a ultimatum. You either have this job or you don't survive at all. And now to discuss the nuance of that. So what is actual wage slavery at this point? So many would say, many contrarian to this position would say, nobody forced you to work that job. The most common one I hear, as a sort of snarky 17-year-old edgelord would say, nobody forced you to work at Walmart. How intelligent of a contrarian this person is. However shall the world know the light of the individual who stated, nobody forced you to work that crappy minimum wage job. Needless to say, that is probably one of the most retarded, redundant, unnuanced, and factually incorrect arguments I've ever heard. Let me bring up this relevant example: extortion. It is not technically robbery. It is something rather akin to it. It might as well be robbery. Let's take the example of the mob lords, or the mob bosses, who will come to businesses and demand a cut of the pay. They wouldn't just say, oh, we're going to fuck your business up otherwise. No, they would say, it would be a shame if something were to happen to your assets, your well-being, your serenity, your prosperity. It'd be a shame if this were to all be destroyed by some ruthless force. How about you hire us to make sure nothing happens? That is called extortion, because you are setting in place conditions in which you are not explicitly stating you are going to actually damage their property. You're setting in place where there is some kind of likely liability to them not purchasing this service from you. Quote unquote service. More like restraint. You're purchasing their restraint. So how does that actually correlate to being a wage slave? Well, let's take a look at it this way. Many people do not have these amazing paying jobs readily available to them. There's a lot more that they actually need to do to qualify for these jobs, be that going to a secondary trade school or taking up an apprenticeship under somebody, in which case you're not really going to be paid well under that. But hey, it's a foot in the door, as many would say. So what is the most readily available thing available to most people? Minimum wage jobs. And while many would say, oh, it's not meant for you to survive on that, I call bullcrap. If you actually go back to when the minimum wage was instated, it's because there were many people who were being underpaid for their labor. This was right at the peak of the child labor being abolished. So if you take a look at it that way, no, this is not meant for teenage level positions. I'm going to bring up an anecdote now. So I was working at Home Depot for $13 an hour, albeit it was only $1 above the minimum wage, but that was the only incentive that they had in order for people to work those jobs because it was primarily a night position. It was graveyard, as you would call it. So, if you take a look at it like that, what was I doing? Was that curtailing something that was akin to the labor standards of a teenager, the labor expectations of a teenager? Well, we had a limited amount of time to unload over, usually on average about 1,300 pieces of product from a small condensed truck in which only 2 people could be in it at a time as per the labor codes. So, what was I doing particularly? What about this was actually a teenager job? Oh, can't be too hard, you're lifting, pushing boxes, sorting them. Well, I actually drove a stand-up forklift. Not something that many teenagers would be expected to do. But you know what? It was actually something that I took up as an initiative in order to probably gain favoritism in the future. Boy, was I wrong about that. But there are many minimum wage job factors that are not meant for teenagers. I'm sorry, but taking on a minimum wage jobs that are full-time. No teenager is going to be working full-time. Part-time college summer jobs? I'm sorry, but what about the year-round? You still have a solid about fucking 9 months to account for there. So, you have 9 months to account for that teenagers aren't going to be readily available to take those low-paying jobs. There's going to be people who are going to have to take those. Majority of the people who make minimum wage, I think around like 60% or 80% of the people who make the minimum wage are above the age of 20. So, this isn't something that is exclusive to teenagers. So that argument is destroyed like that. So the people who are working minimum wage, what are the options available to these people if they cannot work these minimum wage jobs, if there's nothing higher paying readily available? You can either become a freelancer, an entrepreneur, but I'll take it a step further. You can either not work at all and go be homeless somewhere, become a minimalist of a sort. Except that's illegal. You can't really become a homeless anywhere. Loitering laws are in place just about everywhere, and being homeless is the ultimate form, the ultimate cause of people loitering. People filling their day and time with finding a place to camp out. Honestly, what else is available? Jail. But you see, when you go to jail, you are actually sacrificing a lot of your civil liberties. That actually directly violates our natural rights. It actually violates that. We do not have liberty as per the Constitution would grant us. We have to sacrifice that in order for prison. So what is that actually supposed to entail? We either give up our liberties or we work. Yeah, if you're setting up an ultimatum like that in society, ultimately it is something akin to wage slavery. You either work this meager job or you go and live a illegal lifestyle. Your choice, pal. Nobody's forcing you to get that job, except that, honestly, society really is. That's coming from a person who's working 60 hours a week to earn the most meager of income. If I'm being honest, my gross income is probably somewhere around $3,000 working 60 days a week. 60 hours a week. If you configure it like that, I wouldn't consider myself a wage slave. But I'm eerily close to it because even so, I don't make enough to necessarily survive on my own at this point. And if I'm working a 60-hour-a-week job, I would say that me sacrificing literally half of my life to work actually entitles me to being able to live a little bit decently. I should have a little bit of a life of dignity afterwards. I should not be having to suffer. Multiple men and women across America have to work 40 to 60 hours a week. Some even work fucking 80. I don't know how they do it, but they do it. Some work 80 hours a week, and they still barely make enough to live. Half of the people in this country are making $30,000 a year less. That's drastically worse than what I was slip of the tongue saying. So, yeah, I would actually argue that we are being forced to work these jobs. We could always try and find something better, but there isn't always something better. Sadly to say, there isn't always a ladder up for everybody because there's still going to be these bottom level jobs that need to be filled in order for our society to be able to properly function. Thank you. And, this is Nemesis Reaper. Feel free to, follow more of my content if I shall continue to make some.